The most famous Dutch locomotive is number 3737. The most famous American locomotives are the big boys. And the most famous British locomotive is Mallard, is Rocket, is Flying Scotsman, and considering her globe-trotting adventures, many consider her the most famous steam locomotive in the world. But these locos are all standard gauge. Is there such a thing as the world's most famous narrow gauge locomotive? I'd argue that title belongs to the 15-inch gauge Ravenglass and Eskdale Railway's number 10, Northern Rock. Although the Ravenglass and Eskdale Railway in Cumbria had been a railway transporting both passenger and freight, like most narrow gauge railways, it found itself a tourist attraction circa the 1950s. Although 1966 had seen the delivery of a third passenger loco, number 9, River Mite, technically River Mite II, the 1970s saw passenger numbers rise again. In order to devise the best possible design, the RAR's own 280 locomotive number 7, River Esk, was trialled against the Romney, Hythe and Dymchurch Railway 462 number 2, Northern Chief, in 1972. Both River Esk and Northern Chief were designed by Henry Greenley, with River Esk having been built in 1923, and it serving as the progenitor for Northern Chief, which was built in 1925, styled after a Gresley Pacific like Flying Scotsman. The trials proved that a locomotive with 6 driving wheels was no less capable of doing what the RAR desired than a locomotive with 8 drivers, so the new locomotive was to deviate from the 8-coupled configuration then familiar on the RAR. Also relatively new for the railway was a typical narrow gauge outline in order to match the profile of the new enclosed carriages. Various designs were proposed, the earliest of which was a 462 tank engine with a semi-enclosed cab. Another idea was to base the locomotive off a design of the locomotive builder's Bagnall. The type in question was a 462 design which had been built for the 2-foot gauge Gwalior Light Railway in India. They had no official classification as far as I'm aware. Finished in the Highland Railway's Musket Green, the RAR's new locomotive entered traffic as part of the railway's 100th anniversary in 1976, and was named after a major sponsor of its construction, Northern Rock. And whilst most of number 10, as the loco was numbered, was built in-house at Ravenglass, the boiler was a product of Hunslet of Leeds. So Northern Rock and a Hunslet austerity tank are distant cousins. Funny how that works. Northern Rock made quite a splash. Smaller than the other locos on the railway, it could still do just as much work, and of course it had the novelty of being a new-built steam locomotive. The locomotive's leap into worldwide stardom would, however, start in 1990. That year, the book Jock the New Engine would see Northern Rock's fictional counterpart, the titular Jock, enter the Thomas the Tank Engine franchise. Love it or hate it, but having an equivalent locomotive in the Thomas franchise greatly influences the real thing's popularity. Then, in 1994, both Northern Rock and River Mite were sent to Dresden, to the Dresdener Parkeisenbahn, which translates to simply Dresden Park Railway. Whilst River Mite happily chuffed around the park, Northern Rock could not haul passenger trains. She was too wide for the platforms at the otherwise scale railway, and so was left to sit outside the station for guests to enjoy her presence. But perhaps, what makes Northern Rock the most recognisable minimum gauge locomotive in the world was neither a children's story nor the German excursion. In 2002, Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 set itself the task of becoming the nostalgic darling for any latter millennial or early Gen Z youth. Sitting pretty, at a Metacritic user score of 8.7, the theme park management game features the ability to build a minimum gauge railway to your own design. The standard steam locomotive for the miniature railway is clearly based on Northern Rock, with even such details as the nameplate still visible despite the low poly graphics. With Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 still being played by roughly 150 people a day, that is potentially 2 full trains on the RAR who get to see Northern Rock every 24 hours. But in Japan, they don't have to settle for a mere depiction of number 10 on a screen. Niji-no-sato, which I am to believe translates to Rainbow Park, is a themed pleasure garden located in Izu in the there of Japan. Divided in a Japanese garden, the village of Izu, a Canadian village, a craftsman village, and a British village. The clue here is that the British village is named New Romney, after New Romney, headquarters of the aforementioned Romney Hythe and Dymchurch Railway in Kent. Which, come to think of it, makes the Izu New Romney technically New Romney. Much like Old New Romney, New Romney has a minimum gauge railway used to ferry, or rail I guess, guests between the sections of the Rainbow Park. The New Romney Railway has a handful of locomotives, including a diesel based on the RDHR's number 12. But perhaps more famous, and certainly more operational, are their steam locomotives number 1 and number 2. Respectively. These engines were built in 1989 and 1992, and their names are Northern Rock II and Cumbria. The 1989 built Northern Rock II being a 1-to-1 replica of the Northern Rock back in Cumbria, with the locomotive Cumbria having minor cosmetic alterations. And yes, I know I said Northern Rock's worldwide fame began in 1990, but shh, let me tell the story dynamically. In Japan, the two locomotives received their fair share of media attention when they first steamed along the Rainbow Park Railway. And I can only hope that the original Northern Rock's worldwide recognition and classic outline will see her triplet steam for many years to come. Well, for longer than the Efteling decided to stick with steam anyway. She might not be all that old in terms of steam locomotives anyway, but Northern Rock's impact has literally been and continues to be felt around the world. And frankly, I struggle to see any other narrow gauge locomotives matching her achievements.